The Quokka plants a wee castle, written and narrated by the Shieldmaiden. Gentle scooping sounds could be heard coming from the top of the hill. They came to a halt, and a satisfied voice cried out, "There we are!" A fat Quokka stood back and looked at the little hole he had just dug. He shook a back paw to remove some soil which had settled there during his enthusiastic digging. Stabbing his shovel into the ground nearby, he gently removed his backpack. To his delight, one of the castle seeds, eager to be planted, was poking out the top of the little leather bag. He had chosen a foxskin backpack for no particular reason. Gently he lifted the wee castle and set her in the hole. With swift motions he filled the earth in around the seed and trampled it down with his paws. He stood back up, brushing the soil off his paws. She was a tiny castle, not even as tall as the grass around her. Bending forward, the Quokka laid a paw affectionately upon her roof. He made the sign of the Beowulf and said, "May you have walls for the wind and a roof for the rain. Let there be drinks beside the fireplace, laughter to cheer you, and all those you love, may they be near you." Standing back, the great Quokka turned to look down the mountain he had just walked up. Across the sea to an island crowned by a huge castle. If only this little castle could survive at least a few years, then there was hope that she would make it and grow to the size of the big one. He heaved a great sigh. If only men would believe. Castles grow on faith and hard work, and this wee castle needed a lot of it. It needed men to come and build their homes around it, to nurture it, and to love it. A light rain began to fall, and the Quokka's ears twitched. "I don't normally name a castle just yet, but—" He looked down at the little thing settled into the soil, her roof beginning to dampen. "For some reason I like you. I will name you Castle Grin." With one last look at his latest effort, the great Quokka shouldered his shovel and marched away. He was headed further inland, with his little backpack bulging with castle seeds. As he reached the other side of the mountain top, he cast one last look at the huge castle out on the sea. "Magnificent," he murmured. "May the roof above never fall in, may we below never fall out." As he marched down the mountain towards a cozy village in the distance, he knitted his brow. This castle-building business was no mean feat. It was a long-term project, and many who had enthusiasm at the start lost it along the way. The rain was pelting down, and the wind picked up as the Quokka reached the village. He rushed into the pub, the wind banging the door shut behind him. He ordered some food and carefully removed his backpack. There was a fire crackling on the hearth, and he warmed his tail. The barman brought his drink, and they got chatting. The great Quokka told him of the successful planting. "How wonderful," said the barman. "What's next?" "Keep planting," the Quokka exclaimed. "I am concerned about the aesthetics of Scotland, yet these zoning bureaucrats keep bothering me with building heights and wall thicknesses. If only we could return to the days of the Danegeld, give a little gold, go about your life as you wish." "I think we need a more independent Scotland," said the barman. "Surely there is a way to make this work without having Viking descendants rule over us once more." "When I was a child, I cut down a tree." The great Quokka took a sip of his whiskey, which left a burn in his throat. "I found an egg there. Earlier that morning I had vanquished a huge beastly chicken I found in the backyard, and there before me was an egg. I was handed the opportunity to purge my household from the terror of birdkind forever. I stood looking at the egg and felt power. Clearing out this creature's kind would be one of the small joys in life. And yet I stayed my hand. I raised the egg until it hatched, and then it became my best friend." "Where is that bird now?" asked the barman. "I made her my secretary." The Quokka's nose sniffed the air as the scent of steak and kidney pie wafted through the pub. "Never a more trustworthy creature have I met." "Ah, yes, your dinner!" The barman leapt up and hurried away to the kitchen. "At my age, the only thing I should be carrying is a whiskey glass and a cigar. Yet here I am out planting castles. the Quokka announced to the pub as the barman brought out the pie. The meal was delicious, and the Quokka feasted with enthusiasm. It warmed his insides after his days of travelling in the cold and rain. And yet the diligent marsupial would not tarry forever in the pub. His plate clean, his glass empty, and his fat little tummy full, he shouldered his shovel and backpack and went out once more. He made his way towards a finger of land jutting into the North Sea, a delightful spot for the most magnificent of castles. To get there, the Quokka had to make his way over some ground he had traversed before. Scanning the horizon, he looked for some sort of flag. The Scottish clans who took over these castles usually had large hand-painted flags in their own tartan colours. Sometimes, when the castle was newly taken over, the owners opted for cheap and tatty mass-produced emblems to adorn their keeps. But when they were tiny and peeking over the surrounding vegetation, the little castles were decorated with the merest corner of a kilt that had been trimmed off and tied to the flagpole. This marked it as claimed. "There has to be one here," the Quokka informed the wind, his ears buffeted by a particularly strong gust. Crunch! The Quokka looked down. Alas, he had stepped on the castle. It was not grown above the grasses. Its roof was caved in and its walls crumbled. There were no signs that tartan had ever been fixed to his flagpole. The Quokka knelt down and placed his hands upon the dead carcass of his hopes and dreams. And yet, this was not the worst he had encountered. Flashbacks flooded his mind. He had witnessed the collapse of a full-grown castle. It was the hub of the local area, the center of its trade, community, and life. Nonetheless, it had collapsed. The people had rushed off in search of themselves. They sought to escape problems from which they would never be free, for the obstacles they faced lay within their hearts. The great Quokka sighed. After a moment of silence, he rose again. Straightening his back, he shouldered on. Why build these castles in the cold and rain when you could be running a Twitter account and getting others to do the work for you? The voice annoyed the Quokka. He stood away from the wind behind a large rock. He felt kind of fruity as he looked over the North Sea with a metal flask clasped reverently in his paws. You trawl around the country out in this weather-painted castles. Why don't you go on podcasts and farm content? It would be a better use of your time. The Quokka cast a thundering look at the perpetrator of these unsavory suggestions. He had the mark of a man with a high time preference for his pallid brow. Often young chaps would appear before him, interested in his work and curious to meet him. I cannot build things if I am running around being an influencer, the Quokka said. But what about getting the views? The man asked. He was the young and enthusiastic type of fellow that wore the latest fashions and wanted to become an eccentric. What are you doing out here in the wild? The Quokka asked. I just wanted to check things out. The Quokka offered his shovel. What about you start by helping me dig a hole? The young chap stepped back with a look of fear in his eyes. But I don't want to get in trouble. I don't know the zoning laws around here. What would the local council think? We can move the castle if a tantrum is thrown, the Quokka said. He had already decided that this young man was a fool, and quite useless in all matters, besides the movement of his jowls. You talk as if you could pick up a castle as well as a snake lifting weights, the youth chortled. How can a snake lift things if it has no hands? The Quokka asked. The young chap laughed. You are a hoot. I am a pragmatic Quokka. I get shit done, the Quokka announced, and putting his flask away, he took up his shovel. Yet another young chap, full of life and energy, and yet no more good to the castle-building project than a locust barring the path on a warm summer's evening. The Quokka pressed forwards in his mission. Victory is the only option, he murmured as he headed once more into the cold and left the young man behind.